apply to a job 6 hours later, if it was even 6 hours later, the flight school was already calling me about my application and asking me to come teach. So I'm just saying the need is out there. We're at that point in the aviation industry. That's really cool. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm on my, that's so weird. That's so crazy. I don't know what rating or license I'm on. I can help you fly. I mean, hopefully. Definitely feel like what gave me an edge over that was I'm ambidextrous. So when I snowboard, I can snowboard both ways. This will make sense in a second. When I longboard, I can use both feet. And when it comes to flying, I can fly right seat pretty much as easily as left seat. It didn't take me very long to orientate myself to the right seat, and of course practice makes perfect if you're someone who's struggling more with that, but genuinely the hardest part for me was ground. So I booked a lot of sessions with my instructor on the ground because I was worried about the ground portion, as you very well should be, I think, because teaching isn't easy, or when you think it's easy, you're suddenly not making sense because you're actually saying it too in-depth and too complicated, which would be great if I was going for my ATP license. But when it comes to teaching somebody who's new to flight training, my instructor a lot of the time had to tell me that's not going to make sense to somebody who just came in off the street wanting to have their first flight lesson. For ground, I was not shy about booking lessons, so I definitely saved up money, and I would say I put a lot of time and effort into the ground portion. So I taught to my instructor about twice a week, and then that varied. We had a steady schedule of we would teach twice a week, and then I would fly once a week. So I had roughly 2 to 3 lessons a week. That is what I recommend the most for flight training, because 2 to 3 times a week is enough that you don't really burn out, but you have enough that you don't forget stuff. So I've used that most of my flight training when I can due to the weather. But also one thing that changed was I studied everywhere and every second that I could with the ASA, that little book. But I will say that I taught whenever I could. I would teach at work. I would teach at the river to my younger cousin. Cumulative, however you say it?
Cumulative.
Yeah, it builds on each other. I'm reading this again, and I feel like drag is easy, thrust is easy. There's not much to talk about, but lift. I would teach at the park. I would teach at the river. You have to get in that mentality. Again, I've mentioned this in my commercial Checkride video, but when you're going for a new rating or a new license, you have to do that in your mind, mentally first. Then when you can get there, when you can visualize yourself, that's at the top of the pyramid, self-actualization, where you can picture yourself doing it. And then you do it, and you're like, oh, I did it. And it's like, well, because you pictured yourself doing it. The best ways to get over Checkride anxiety is just to over-prep. Study as much as you can. Again, I mentioned I studied everywhere. I got to the point where definitely a month to 2 weeks before my Checkride, I'm a very boring person. All I really do is go to the gym, go to Dutch Bros or coffee shop, or study at home or the library or wherever my study spot is for that day, and eat rice and beans. Like, I get very boring before my Checkride because it is kind of all I can think about. That's not something that I recommend. For me, the flight portion is never what I'm as worried about. I'm normally more worried about the ground/oral portion because they're just drilling you across a table for hours. Oral portion for my Checkride actually wasn't as much FOI as I thought it would be, but it was a lot of teaching. I taught a lot. So some people will say that they get more FOI questions, and some people will say that they get more FARs and regulations questions, but for me, he definitely wanted to make sure that I could teach. Realistically, I do like the way that my Checkride went because I feel like he really was making sure that I could teach. So he wasn't like, where in the regulations does it say, and then like route memorization. He was like, oh, let's talk about this. Oh, so how would you teach a student to enter the pattern? And then, I'd get up and I would use the board or I would pull out my lesson. And it was very much improv, very much on the spot. So it was like improv, make it relatable, make it personal, and then also make it legal. So I stumbled a little bit. It was a little bit shaky at some parts. Definitely stall aerodynamics. My brain just started short-circuiting and I was like, oh no, I recognize this. But thankfully he let me kind of catch my breath, take some water, and then I jumped right back into it. What I used to study, I kept it simple. Keep it FAA. Keep it clean FAA. FAA across the board, because when the examiner asks you where you read that or where that reference is, you're probably going to be better off citing an actual FAA source. So the FAR, the AIM, AC6165 Hotel is the current version. Check and make sure they're always updating. I'm gonna be able to quote something that is legally binding, so the FAA. So I used all my FAA documents. So my primary source for studying was the PHAC, the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. The PHAC was my primary source. The AFH, Airplane Flying Handbook, and you pull from that to make lessons if you want to. My lesson plans, which are not FAA approved, of course. Lesson plans are the one thing that I used and referenced a lot, and they're not from the FAA. You should be able to cite or recognize pictures from your lesson plans from the actual sources. And then the FAR aim, of course. I would genuinely say that while this book was amazing and I carried it with me everywhere, deadass, on God, no joke, no lie, this book came with me everywhere and I have the pictures to prove it. This was a great review, but it was not going to teach me to be a flight instructor. What taught me to be a flight instructor was going up with my friends, sitting in the right seat, and then having them ask me questions like, what does this do? Oh, what did I do wrong? Going flying and trying to teach someone steep turns. That is what taught me to be a flight instructor, actually doing the thing. I think regardless of how good you are at teaching, I think that's the best way to prepare for a flight instructor check ride, is to actually just flight instruct. And then of course you memorize the FARs and the regulations that are applicable that you're going to need. 91-113, 91-103, 91-105, all of 68. All of 68, just at least know off the top of your head, because they could really dive into basic med and medical requirements, and then you're like, oh, I haven't really reviewed this since like commercial or maybe private, but medical got to the point where I was very comfortable explaining the medical process, application, the limitations to anybody and everybody. That's a very common question you're just gonna get your whole life in aviation. About the privileges of what you can do on a third versus a first. I took it in a 150, saving that coin, and we did everything. I will not lie to you, we did like 12 maneuvers, we did all the landings, we did many stalls.
How long is it? It's 4 minutes and there's more? My boy, you still going? That's a compound sentence.
Also because we were kind of like having fun. It was about 1.6, but we definitely fit in a lot of maneuvers in that flight, and we fit in all the landings, the power off 180. It was long and tiring, but I would say the confidence at this point in my life was kind of where I was excited to go fly with this friend in aviation who has such a wealth of knowledge. And I've reached that point after a very long time. This was the only check ride where I can genuinely say I feel like I wasn't really stressed out about it, because I knew that I had what it took. And even if I didn't have what it takes, I would get to that point. That's wild, because normally I know what I'm pointing to, kind of, but now I'm like, I'm not ATP yet. I don't have the hours for it, so I don't know. I could do my multi-engine, I could do my seaplane rating. I've always wanted to do that. I don't know what comes next in my career. I'm about to close the door, because it is.
Oh my God.
My life is good. Really good. I get to wake up every morning at 5 a.m. and make some soup. It's the best. I love it.